afternoon. So this week we are now in the last Torah reading of the book of Leviticus, Parshas Bechukotai. As we mentioned last week that many times this week's Torah reading and last week's Torah reading are usually combined, but this week they are separate because of the leap year. There was a woman that approached a rabbi, a Chabad rabbi in Israel, and came over to her and told her about a terrible issue she was having with her eyes. The doctor found calcium stones in her eye, which was causing her not to see and block her vision. And he was able to remove the stones from one eye, but once he removed it from one eye, all of a sudden it came to the other eye. And this was a continuous problem that was going on, and she asked the rabbi for some type of maybe spiritual advice, what could be done to be able to take care of it. The Chabad rabbi told him that the Rebbe would always suggest that whenever somebody has an issue with a particular part of their body, they should always look to see what mitzvah can be done with that part of that body. And if we utilize that part and we strengthen a mitzvah that has a connection with that part of the body, we can then hope and pray that that part of the body will be healed. And so he suggested to her that he says there's a code in Jewish law that explains that before a person washes their hands in the morning, they should not touch their eyes. And because when we wake up in the morning, our hands have impurity on it, and therefore we touch things that become impure, and that spreads the impurity if we don't wash our hands right away. One of the things is also even a child, when they're first thing that you do to a child when they're born, and even as they grow up, we wash their hands right away in the morning, that they shouldn't touch things that are impure. And even today in many Jewish factories as well, it is a rule that everybody has to wash their hands before they even get to work or anything of that nature. And that is because their hands carry impurity on it. So he told her to be careful, and she said indeed she was not careful in washing her hands in the morning. And she started to be careful about washing her hands in the morning. And Baruch Hashem, thank God, she no longer had any of these eye issues, anything more. What is the story, and why do I bring the story? And there are many stories of the people that weren't able to have children, and because of that they started keeping tarries hamishpacha, laws of family purity, or people that had issues with their arms started putting on tefillin, anything of this nature. And what is it? Because everything that exists in this world in the physical plane is connected to the spiritual plane. And they're interrelated and interconnected, and many times when we have a physical dilemma or a physical issue or a physical ailment, it is because the spiritual connectivity connected with that ailment has to be corrected. And because of that, when a person commits to strengthening that level of his ailment, spiritually, that automatically will have an effect and change the level of the ailment physically as well. And this has more than just about reward and punishment. This is just related to the very fact that you are here in this world to do what God wants you to do. And God wants to make sure that you have all the tools necessary in your toolbox to be able to do them. If you're not following the tools, there's no reason for you to have them. So therefore, when God gives us these tools, which is our physical body and the physical strength that we have, we need to be able to utilize them for the proper and appropriate things, and then God gives us the strength to be able to accomplish them and so on, because He wants us to be productive, and He wants us for God's interest to be productive. And if we don't have those physical tools in our toolbox, we won't be able to do them. Therefore, we have to recommit ourselves and strengthen ourselves in a commitment spiritually, and then God gives us the physical needs that we need as well. This is something which we look at in the general scope of the world, which also brings us to this week's Torah reading. The majority of this week's Torah reading talks about the consequences, the curses that God gives the Jewish people should they not follow the commandments. And the question that many have, and an old age question is, what's the purpose of these curses? Why would a God, who is a merciful, kind, benevolent God, wish any type of thing other than blessings to His only child, the Jewish people? Is it just not good enough for God to say all the blessings that He'll give us and say, guess what? You don't follow what I tell you to do, you get the opposite of blessings. Why is there a need to enumerate the detail of these curses? Twice a year we read about the curses. Once before Rosh Hashanah, we read it in the book of Deuteronomy, in the Torah reading of Kisavo, and once before the holiday of Shavuos, that we read about it in the book of Leviticus, in Parshas Bechukotai. We don't read it the Shabbos exactly before Shavuos or the Shabbos exactly before Rosh Hashanah, so we get a little breather from all the terrible consequences that God mentions in those Torah readings. So, for example, this week is Bechukotai, the following week is going to be Parshas Bamidbar, and then is going to be the holiday of Shavuos. The same idea was when it comes to Rosh Hashanah. Usually it's going to be Kisavo, which is the curses, and then there's a parsha in between, which will be the Nitzavim and Vayelech together, or Nitzavim on its own, and then we'll have this holiday of Rosh Hashanah. But that is because God doesn't want to totally put it right next to the holiday, but it has there before the holiday. Why? And the commentaries explain, and the Talmud actually says, that Ezra was the one who set up the entire system of when we read the different holidays and the different weeks of the year. And Ezra made that we should read the curses right before Rosh Hashanah and right before Shavuos. And this is to prepare, and so that a year of its curses should be finished, so we can start a new year fresh with blessings. Why would they read it on Shavuos? And the commentaries explain, because Shavuos is also a semi-Rosh Hashanah. Shavuos is a Rosh Hashanah, the time when the fruits are judged on the tree, if there should be a productive year or not, and therefore Shavuos has a symbolic Rosh Hashanah as well. The commentaries go a step further, the Kabbalistic commentaries, which is one of the oldest Kabbalist books that we find. Rav Meir ben Gabbai tells us from the first Kabbalist, he explains and it shows the comparison of Shavuos to Rosh Hashanah. Just like Rosh Hashanah is the time where God judges every person, and it is a time that we have to perfect ourselves in how we're going to improve in the year ahead, so too Shavuos, that even though it's the time of the year that the fruit of the tree is judged, but we know that the Torah is compared to a tree. Eitz Chaim Hila Machazikim Ba. The Torah is considered a tree to those who a tree of life to those who hold steadfast to it. So too the human being is compared to a tree. As we say in the book of Deuteronomy, Ki Adam Eitz Asada, man is compared to a tree. And that's why, and the same way a tree has the ability to continue to prosper, to grow, and to give up fruit and for future generations, so too the human being has that ability as well. So the same way that the human being is judged on Rosh Hashanah for the year to come, and the trees are judged on Shavuos, the tree that is being judged is our commitment to the study of Torah, that we are judged on the holiday of Shavuos, as it's brought. The Rebbe brings in his collection of talks called the Hayom Yom, which is that he says, the Rebbe brings in the Hayom Yom and he says, while the Shavuos is an opportune time for every person to make an endeavor and a resolution in the study of Torah and their commitment of their fear of God, just like on Rosh Hashanah, where then Satan is not there to prosecute, and we have that ability to connect to God in a way of accepting God's kindness on the day of Rosh Hashanah, so too on Shavuos is our time that we are able to make that resolution in the study of Torah as well. So if we look back, why are we reading the consequences, the curses, before the holiday of Shavuos and before the holiday of Rosh Hashanah? Both of them are there to prepare us for that auspicious day and that special day to complete a year of curses so we can start fresh a year of blessings and happiness. So while we look and as we approach and we read these consequences and curses, to be able to receive the Torah, to take our resolution of the Torah in absolute commitment and faith, and so too as it comes to the time of Rosh Hashanah, what is the Torah reading telling us? What are we reading in these curses? And if somebody looks in these Torah readings, what does it say? It starts off telling us, if you will go in your statutes and you will follow what God tells you to do, you will have the rain in its time, and you will have blessings. You will chase off your enemy, one with 100 to one with 10 with 1,000, and you will be successful beyond your imagination. But if God forbid you don't listen to what God tells you to do, then there's an enumeration of all the terrible consequences and curses that come to a person for not following the commandments. And over here comes a question, a very famous question asked by Rabbi Yehuda Lowy, the Maral of Prague, as well as many other great commentators who asked the question. And as we mentioned before, what is the need for the Torah to enumerate the detail of so many curses? God could have said all the wonderful blessings we get, and go into detail of all the wonderful blessings, and then say, by the way, if you don't do all those blessings, then you get the opposite of it, and you use your imagination. The question even becomes stronger because in Judaism and Torah says we're not allowed to curse a person. Not only, of course, Maimonides says one is not allowed to curse a person using God's name, But in code of Jewish law, it states that a person should not say foul things about another individual, negative about it, and should not speak ill about another person. Not only not speaking ill about another person, but the word in Hebrew to curse comes from the word kilel, which means to curse, to say something bad. But in fact, it also has the same root word of miskalkel, get ruined. If you pray for somebody else's demise, meaning that you curse somebody, what in essence you're doing is you are ruining yourself. And Code of Jewish Law explains, because when you talk ill of another person and you speak about the demise of another person, what you're creating within yourself, a sense of animosity, lack of care, disrespect, you train yourself to be a negative individual, which in itself is a negative thing, and a negative attitude and an abrogation of the Torah. And therefore, Maimonides puts it this way. He says in his Sefer HaMitzvahs, in his Book of Commandments, Negative Commandments 317, he says the Torah was so careful of one not cursing another person, because the person who is cursing all of a sudden comes to a state of revenge and anger and all the other types of negative behaviors. Another second reason why a person doesn't curse is because God created the universe in a way that He spoke and the world was created. That means everything that we find in the world that was created and that is created constantly is because God is continuously articulating and verbalizing the creation of the world. That means when we speak, it's not just words, they actually have an impact. They actually make a difference. Every single word that we say, which is a negative connotation, is opposing to the words that God said when He created the world. So not only when we're cursing God, we're hurting somebody else and making a negative impact or cursing that individual, but also this is making an impact on the person, on the creation that God made. Not only that, everything we say in this world, even though it may seem like a regular simple word, has an impact in the world above. The famous story that is brought in the Hayom Yom of the Baal Shem Tov, who once heard one of his students yell at his friend, "I'll tear you up like a fish," in anger. He told the students to put their hands on one another. And then the Baal Shem Tov stood in the end of the circle and put his hands on the two students that were next to them, and he told them to close their eyes. And as they closed their eyes, they all started screaming out of fear and shock, because they saw the person who said, "I'll tear you like a fish," tearing the other person like a fish. The Baal Shem Tov was showing them that the words that you say have an impact on the worlds above, have an impact on the individual. It has an impact on what you say is not just words. It's not just I said something, big deal. What you say makes a difference. Not only does it make a difference in the negative, but it also makes a difference in the positive. And even positive and negative. It is a very commonly saying word, Al tiftach peh satan. Don't give the prosecution any excuse. Don't give him any way in. When you say something just because you said it, you're automatically opening doors and avenues for people to utilize it, people, angels, and negative influences to utilize it for the wrong way. As well as you say things for the positive, it also has influences. A very famous, well-known story told about when they laid the cornerstone for the shul in Lubavitch. That means after when the third Chabad Rebbe was building it, because during the time of the Tzemach Tzedek, the third Chabad Rebbe, Lubavitch expanded exponentially. It says they had the largest amount of Hasidim ever. And because of that, they had to make an expansion in the shul in Lubavitch. And when they laid the cornerstone for the shul in Lubavitch, the Tzemach Tzedek asked the Hasidim at the time, do they want to hear a Torah or do they want to hear a story? Now, if the Tzemach Tzedek is asking that, that's because probably they should want to hear a story. It's an opportune time to hear a story that he was going to share. And the Tzemach Tzedek says, here I'll tell you the story. There was once a wealthy man by the name of Rabbi Yaakov. Rabbi Yaakov owned an inn, and he rented it out to another fellow Jew. The problem was that the fellow Jew was behind in his rent, and he didn't pay his dues. A year passed, he still hasn't paid his rent. Rabbi Yaakov comes to the fellow and says, listen, you got to pay me or else I'm going to throw you out. The fellow doesn't know what to do, so he runs quickly to the Rebbe of this rich person who was the Ruzhiner, the tzaddik of Ruzhin. And he tells him, your chassid wants to throw me out of the inn. What should I do? The Rebbe of Ruzhin calls in Rabbi Yaakov and says, listen here, have a little rachmanis, have a little mercy on this fellow Jew. Let him stay. He'll pay you later. Another year passes. Still hasn't paid him for the year. His first year hasn't paid him for the second year. And again, this fellow goes to the Rebbe of Ruzhin and he talks to Rabbi Yaakov. Rabbi Yaakov lets him stay for another year. This happens another year, a third year, he hasn't paid him 1 year, hasn't paid him a second year, and now he comes to the third year. Rabbi Yaakov said, I'm sorry, it's 3 years, you haven't paid me, that's it. You got to go. And he kicked him out of his inn. Time passes, Rabbi Yaakov lives a nice, sagely long life, but he comes up into heaven after 120, and all of a sudden they want to bring him in front of the heavenly court, and they tell him, look what you did. You kicked out a Jewish family from the inn. You can't. Who cares about all the charity, all the lovely Torah that you studied? At the end of the day, you took a family, you threw them out of the inn. And therefore, you're not going to go to the right place. Rabbi Yaakov's soul says, this is not fair. How can you angels judge me for what's going on in this world? You don't know the obligations that I had to pay. You don't know the bills that I had to take care of. You don't know what it means for 3 years not to get paid. You don't live in a physical world. Money means nothing for you. How are you able to decide for me that I went through and to say I was wrong for not letting the person go? So they said, you know what? We're going to bring 2 people who lived in this world, and they will judge you. And that will be the souls of the Bach, which is the Beis Chodesh, the Bayis Chodesh, which is a commentary and code of Jewish law, and the author of the code of Jewish law himself, the Beis Yosef, Rabbi Yosef's Karo, those souls will judge you. So the rich man's soul says, this is not fair. This is all the story that Tzemach Tzedek is telling the Chassidim. The rich man's soul says, this is not fair. What do you mean? They lived 400 years ago, before I was even around. They don't know what money is today. They don't know what quality of life is today, how much I should live, if I should be. So they said, you know what, you're right. And therefore, what we're going to do is going to have to ask a soul who is on this world, to be able, who understands and appreciates what money is, what finances is, what it means to pay bills. And only a soul which is in this physical world can rule to see if Rabbi Yaakov is correct or not. And the Tzemach Tzedek then turns to his Chassidim and says, I believe that Rabbi Yaakov is correct. What do you say? And everybody shouts out, he's correct, and that was the end of the story. What do they understand? What did the Chassidim realize? That what their words saying, he is correct, he is right, they were having an impact in the world above, what was going to happen to that soul. What we see over here is that the words that we say have so much power and strength to the extent of what it can impact, which brings us to our question even more so. How then does the Torah elaborate for 27 verses talking about curses and consequences and negativity that's going to happen to Jewish people and befall them? We should say, Al tiftach peh, don't open your mouth. Why are you giving excuses? Why are you allowing it? How then does the Torah go on for so long to say it? What is the purpose of it? What would be the need for it? And when looking into the lens, through the lens of the Hasidic masters and understanding the Torah reading, we can understand a whole different picture to what this Torah reading is all about. Starting with a very famous Hayom Yom, third Hayom Yom we're quoting today, but another famous Hayom Yom from right before Rosh Hashanah, the 17th of Elul, a story that the Alter Rebbe every single year would read, every single week would read the Torah in his own shul. He was the Torah reader. One year, it was Parshas Kisava, it was the Torah reading of Kisava where the consequences are read. And his son, the Mittler Rebbe, he was only before Bar Mitzvah age. He was a young boy, he was about 11, 12 years old. And he heard the Torah being read by somebody else. And he fainted in the middle. He fainted and became weak to the extent that they said he might not be able to fast even Yom Kippur, which is going to be a month later. They asked him, why'd you faint? He says, I heard what was being read in the Torah, such terrible things. He says, I don't understand. This is not the first time you're hearing the Torah reading. Every single week, every single year, you heard the Torah reading about these consequences. He says, yeah, but every single year my father read them. And when my father reads the Torah, I don't hear any curses. It's all how you read something. It's all the tune in how you say something. They say a story, a little joke. They used to say, this guy once accused a person in his shul. He said, you're a thief. So he goes over to the Rav and he tells the rabbi, this guy just embarrassed me in front of the shul. He called me a thief. So the rabbi calls him up and he says, you have to go in front of the shul and apologize that you called him a thief. He gets up in front of the shul and he says, I said, you're a thief. That's all in the tune. Indeed, they said it's all in how you sing it. You can say some things, sing things in a question and an answer. It's all how the tune, how you say it all. The same idea is also when we look at the curses and the consequences that are meant in this week's Torah reading. We can always read them in different ways. Every person in life, and we're soon going to get to in a moment, you can have two people experience the exact same episode. And we see this, unfortunately, let's say, the concentration camps. You can have two people that live through the same camp. One person can come out singing the greatness of God, how God saved them. One person can say, where was God? He let my whole family get killed. I barely made it on a morsel of potato throughout the whole life. Exact same. The people, they weren't different. They lived through the same exact camp, went through the same suffering, everything else, and they have a different perspective. What it teaches us is that everything in life depends on how you sing it, depends on how you look at it. Some things you can look at a great blessing and teaching moment, while some things you can look at as the most torturous time and painful event. When we look at the curses that the Torah gives us and the consequences, they are not curses. They are in fact the direction in life of teaching us with great lessons, of teaching us how we should perfect our lives, teaching us of what dangers lie ahead. When a person has pain, what is pain telling him? If you wouldn't have pain, how many times would you burn your hand on the fire? If you wouldn't have pain, how many times would you not go to doctor and take care of an infection that was there? Pain is telling you that there's something deeper, is telling you that there's something you have to take care of. There's a red line that you have to go and deal with. Pain is telling you that there's something you have to work at. What the Torah is telling us is that when it comes to a certain level, what these curses and consequences are teaching us, is that there is a certain red line that you come to, and that God tells you, 1 second, are you on the right path or are you on the wrong path? Are you walking on weeds and thorns or are you walking on the straightened path which is nice and comfortable? And sometimes if you're encountering these troubles and dangers, must be that you've veered off the path or something must have happened. In fact, they are not consequences, but they're actually lessons in teaching us what we should do. The truth is, if we look at it, it's in the Torah itself. Where do we see it in the Torah itself? If you look in the Torah, something very, in fact, the commentaries, as we mentioned, talk about this a lot. If you look, there's 11 verses that tell us about the blessings, and there are 29 verses that tell us about the curses. You would think that a benevolent, kind, merciful God would expound on the blessings and would minimize on the curses. But it seems the opposite. In fact, when Moshe comes to bless the Jewish people, what does he say? Blessed are you in your city, blessed are you in your town, and everything should work out. You should wake over your enemies. 11 verses, he tells them just general ideas. All of a sudden, when it comes to the curses, boy, does he delineate exactly what, when, how, and what's going to happen, and you're going to feel this illness, you're going to feel that illness, and everything else. Why? Why such detail? The Medrash explains, and the Medrash says, that actually the blessings are there much more. Because the blessings, if you look, they start from Aleph and they go until Taf. So what the blessings are basically saying, Moses says, I'm giving you everything from A to Z. I'm not going to tell you the details. I'll just tell you everything from A to Z. However, when it comes to the curses, you'll notice that the curses they're each one, they go from Vav to Hey. There's only 2 letters. And not only that, even those 2 letters are backwards. There's 29 verses, but they're all a Vav and a Hey. Very limited to what those curses are. You notice something very fascinating. You see this with people. You ask somebody, how you doing? Oh, I'm great, thank God, everything's well. That's if everything's going good. But if a person says, how you feeling? Oh, my back hurts, my leg hurts, my eye hurts. All of a sudden, my son's giving me that sorrow, and my daughter's giving me that sorrow, and my wife. All of a sudden, they got a whole litany of things that they're going to tell you of everything that's hurting them. How come when it comes to tzaras, and it comes to pain and problems, we can tell you a list from here to Texas. But when it comes to blessings and when everything's good, it's all good, all good. What happened? Why don't you say, oh, my son's doing great, my back's great, my foot's great, my eyes... No, that we don't detail. Because when things are positive, we look at the overall perspective. And as the Torah tells us, when it comes to a blessing, from A to Z, it's all good. When we tell you about something that's negative, all of a sudden we tell you, no, it's not going to happen, everything. everything is not going to be all bad. You'll have issues here, you'll have issues there, you'll have issues here, you'll have issues there, but it's vav to hey. But an interesting thing, it goes the opposite. It's not in the order of the aleph base, usually hey, then vav. Why is it vav to hey? While the blessings are written from aleph to taf. And the Medrash tells us something very fascinating here. And the Medrash says as follows. Why does God put the curses from vav to hey and the opposite way around? Because what's God telling us? These are curses. But what do I really want to do? I want to make it the right way around. I want to make it hey to vav. I want to transform those curses into the greatest blessings that you can get. This is what the Torah is telling us. That while God enumerates these curses and these pain and sufferings and different consequences that are going to happen to the Jewish people, this is there to inspire the individual to transform them from a curse to a blessing. From a vav to a hey. To take what's out of order and put it back into order. Because these curses are only here to be able to awaken us and inspire us to be able to do what is right. Like we find an interesting medrash, in Medrash Eicha, which talks about the lamentations, the destruction of the Holy Temple. And the medrash talks about the time of the destruction of the Second Temple. During the destruction of the Second Temple, there was a people called the Bar Yoinim. They were like the Jewish mafia. And they were not interested in capitulating to the Romans. They felt that they would have to fight the Romans. During that time, there were 3 very wealthy people who owned warehouses that the Talmud says there would have been enough for 20 years to supply Jerusalem, and they would be able to get over the siege. But because this mafia people, the Bar Yoinim, they wanted to fight the Romans, they burnt down all those supplies, so the Jewish people should feel the need to fight the mafia. When Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, who was the leader of the Jewish people, heard that the mafia people burnt down those warehouses, he went, Oy! Voy! Oy va'avoy! What am I going to do? That he saw the end coming after they did. And that's when he escaped from Jerusalem and he was able to petition Vaspian to be able to save certain people and things from the destruction of the temple. But all of a sudden at that time with the Bar Yoinim, when the mafia heard that Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai said, whoa, they knew that Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai was the leader of the Jewish people, and they wanted to take Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai to task, as you can imagine, for, so to speak, discrediting what they did. So when they came to him, so they said, why did you say woe? He said, you misspelled it. Woe can be spelled as wow. You see, it's all how you read it. There's woe and there's wow. Woe means I'm upset. Wow means I'm excited. I really said wow, not woe. That was to be able to excuse himself. But what the Medrash tells us to bring us is that the word v'haya, and it will be, is always a terminology of joy. When you have vav before hey, v'haya, while it looks like something negative, it could be something positive. It could be transformed into something of great joy as well. And this is why we talk about that even before the verses of the curses. They all begin with a vav and a hey. It can either be a vav and a hey, v'haya, for a negativity. But God is hoping that we will take that negativity and transform it into something of the most joyous time of a blessing as well. And that's why these exact curses that are mentioned, they can be curses. And that's why, though we ask the question, how come God has to go into so detail, they can be made into blessings as well. But we can go even deeper. And deeper than that is to understand and recognize, as we started off saying, the interconnection that exists between the physical and the spiritual. That the physical is not only running on its own, but it is connected and interrelated with the spiritual. Which brings us to one of the most famous questions that many ask, and most of the commentaries ask, which is, how is it possible that we sit in this world and we look that the Torah promises us about the rewards of the physical pleasures. If you follow the Torah, I will give you rain and time and everything else. While the Talmud tells us one of the very famous questions. The Talmud says a story about a child who's told by his father to climb up the tree and take the mother bird, send it away, and to bring down the baby birds. Both of those commandments, the Torah promises us, you will have long life. Honoring your parents, you have long life. And as well, sending away the mother bird, you get long life. And over here, all of a sudden, the Torah says a mitzvah that you'll have long life. And what is the Torah? And what happens to this child? He's on his way down, coming back the tree. to come give the baby birth to his father, and he falls, the ladder drops, and he dies. The Talmud asks, 1 second, where is the reward? Rabbi Yaakov comes along and says, Schar mitzvah there's no schar mitzvah b'hayal maleka. In this world, there is no reward for the mitzvahs. The reward for the mitzvahs is in the world to come. So when God says you'll have a long life, it's not in this world, but it's in the world to come. The question is, if there's no reward of the mitzvahs in this world, why then is the Torah promising us all the physical mitzvahs? I thought there's no reward for mitzvahs in this world. Not only that, the sages tell us that tzaddikim, righteous people, suffer in this world so that they should be cleansed and purified, and in the world to come they'll have a nice, beautiful, happy place. And on the opposite, we find that evil people have a wonderful time in this world, so they should get nothing in the world to come. As the very famous story that is told about the individual who once, there was this great tzaddik who died the same day as a terrible person who was actually a tax collector. Those days, a tax collector had freedom to do whatever they wanted, and he would, of course, make sure that the poor people paid more than their needed share. And he was a very terrible individual, and they died the same day. And during the funerals, while they were happening, the big righteous person had a big, massive, beautiful funerals, and eulogies were about to be said, but all of a sudden the alarm went off, because where was the cemetery outside town? And they said, thieves are coming. Everybody dropped the beds, and they ran. After a half hour, everybody recongregated, and they came back, but the problem was they mixed up the two dead bodies. The bad guy got the big funeral and the eulogies, while this tzaddik got almost nobody by his funeral, and nobody there. And his student, who stayed at his side, was very disturbed by it. How is it possible? My teacher, who studied Torah, taught Torah, was a great tzaddik, and got this little funeral, nobody was there to eulogize him properly, while this other person, who was a terrible person in life, was mean to the poor, was stingy, and would work with the government, and cooperated against Jewish people, and he got this wonderful funeral. And from heaven he came to him a dream, and told him that once your teacher was in amongst a bunch of people who they denigrated and spoke ill of another great tzaddik, and he did not protest. So his punishment was that in this world he would not get a nice funeral, so this way when he comes to the world to come, everything will be good for him. This bad guy once was making a big party because the treasury minister was coming. But the guy changed plans, the treasury minister didn't show up, and this guy had a whole party. And he went and he gave all the food to the poor people. So because he did one good deed, he had to get rewarded for it in this world, so when he comes upstairs, he'll meet his time. What we see over here is something fascinating. The bottom line is that in this world, seemingly there was no reward for doing mitzvahs, while all the reward is in the world to come. Why then does the Torah enumerate and tell us about all the wonderful things that are going to happen in this world and the punishments that happen in this world, if seemingly there is no reward for mitzvahs in this world? It seems counterintuitive of what we usually taught. Not only that, my Nachmanides talks about when a person comes to the world to come, everything's upside down, that the one who thinks he's doing great here is actually not doing great up there, one who's not doing great here is really doing great up there. So what's going on over here? And this has been a question that many philosophical scholars of the past have discussed, the Talmud has discussed, and so on. And what does it mean? Another fascinating point you will find, just as a side note, when the Torah enumerates reward, not one mention of the world to come. You will not find anywhere in the written Torah a mention of the promise of the reward of the world to come. All the promises and all the different rewards that are mentioned are all about, I'll give you rain in time, you'll be able to overcome your enemies, you'll be able to sit in peace in your land, and everything else. There's zero mention in the Torah, in the 5 books of Moses, of anything about in the world to come. What happened? It's such a vital, Maimonides puts it as one of the 13 principles of faith that we all believe with complete faith in the world to come. No mention of it in the Torah. Shouldn't at least tell us about the blessings that Moshe is telling the Jewish people? You follow the Torah and the mitzvahs. If everything's about the world to come and really not here like the Talmud describes, where is it? Also, those who have studied Ethics of Our Fathers in chapter 1 know that it says, Antignos talks about it in the 3rd Mishnah, be like the servants who serve their master not for the sake of reward, but only for the sake of heaven. If we should only serve God not for the sake of reward, why does the Torah tell us? You know what? You follow, you get your reward. Why does he even know about the reward? But if we go back to what we spoke about before, the whole Torah reading, when we read about Parshas Bechukotai, is probably talking about something else, not about reward and punishment like we usually talk about it. But in fact, it's telling us about the merge, the fusion of the physical and the spiritual, of how they work in tandem. And if we look deeply into the words of Maimonides, we see that Maimonides, and how the Rebbe expounds on this, that over here he's telling us there's 2 points how God views and focuses the actions of the human being. And there's 2 things that God gives us. There's number 1, money for livelihood, support money. Then there's number 2, reward and punishment. What does this mean? Number 1 is that if God wants us to do the commandments, He has to give us what we need. As the words of the Talmud, God doesn't come in trickery with His creations. If God gives us a mitzvah, that means we're able to do the mitzvah. And if God tells us that we have to write a Torah on parchment, that means He's going to give us the ability to make parchment. And He'll give us the ability to make leather. And if we have to send our kids to school to teach them a Jewish education, He'll give us the money for sending them for an education. And if we have to make Pesach or to make Tishrei, whatever it may be, all the needs that are needed for financially, physically, spiritually to be able to do, God has an obligation to give it us. Why? Or else we can't get the job done. So God gives us what we need to be able to get the job done. Why? Because if we truly do the job, then God will give us to do it. The problem is when we back off from doing the job, God says, okay, you're not doing the job, why should I give it to you? Take, for example, you take a job for a company. You take a job for a company, you need to have a car to get there, you need to have a computer that works, and you need to be able to... So the company gives you those tools that you need to be able to do the job. Without that, you can't do the job. Now, the more valuable or the more useful you are to the company, the more tools they're going to give you. So, for example, if the company feels that it's valuable for you to be in office working, they're going to make sure to accommodate that. If they see you have no value to be in the office, they'll say, why should we pay for you to come to the office? If they see they have no value for you to have the computer, say, get your own computer, show me that you have value. So we have to prove value to be able to be accommodated that we should get that stuff. So too, in our own life, when we work with dealing with Hashem, we need to prove value that it's needed, that Hashem should make sure that it works. So when we work with our limbs, and we work with our body, and we work with the tools that God gives us, and money and everything else, and we utilize it for the right purpose, and we utilize it for a godly purpose, God says, okay, great, I'm going to give them more supplies because they're very productive, and therefore I want things to happen. On the other hand, besides that, there is a person, for example, while the company gives them a company car, a company computer, and a company everything else, they still pay him a salary. Why do they pay him a salary? They pay him a salary because they feel he's valuable to the company, and they want to keep him. They don't just pay him a salary for his life cost of living. They pay him even to live, and beautiful cost of living. You have CEOs and CFOs that are making 100x of their cost of living. Even of a beautiful cost of living. Why? Because the company finds them valuable. Their work, they want to keep them to the company because of what they're doing. The same idea is also when we talk about when a person in his relationship with God. There's 2 aspects to it. God, number 1, if we seize that we utilize what we have to be able to do our job in this world, He'll give us what we need, healthy and well. And the more we utilize what we're supposed to do, the more we'll get what we need. At the same time, we're building up a track record, which is a reward in the world to come. Which is a reward of our salary, so to speak, of what we're going to get. It's not necessarily a reward. It's because we're creating value as to what we are. And this is when it comes to difference. And why in this week's Torah reading it doesn't mention any mention of the world to come. Because this week's Torah reading is not talking about the cumulative reward for your value. This week's Torah reading is Moshe telling the Jewish people, you want to go into the land of Israel, you're going to go into the land of Israel, you have to have a relationship with Hashem. Having a relationship with Hashem means recognizing the obligation, the responsibility that you have. Because God gave you the tools in the toolbox, utilize them. And if you don't utilize them, you're going to lose them. Because there's no purpose for you to have them. We'll give them to somebody else. On the other hand, when it comes to the world to come, which is the world to come which will enjoy and bask in the pleasures of God, of absolute spirituality, That's creating your value. That's your vacation package. That's your 401k. That's your retirement package. That's where you're going to be settled in retirement forever and enjoy. That's the value you're creating. That's not what he's talking about in the Torah reading of Bechukotai. Not only that, if we look in the Torah, where the Torah takes and values every single person's deed, not only Jewish people. For example, Og Melech HaBashan. Og, the guy that survived the flood. He lived for about 1,000 years. He lived all the way until Moses. And Moses was the one that killed him. So the Talmud asks, why do you live so long, such a terrible guy? It was because he did two good things in his life. He saved Lot, and he did one other good thing. And because of that, he lived so long. So we see that when somebody is needed, Og was needed to save Lot, and it was needed again later on, God let them live and gave him the tools in his toolbox to be able to be there. The same idea is also when we talk about in every single part of our life and everything that we have, is that God gives us that ability and understands and appreciates what we have to do and recognizing that understanding. And then when we look at the words, that and when Hashem gives us the Torah, and God gives us the Torah, and every single part of the Torah is that the Torah is Eitz Chaim, it's a tree of life. And Hashem gives us the Torah, and while He says in the Torah, I'll take away hunger, I'll take away your enemies, because by us studying Torah, what we're doing, and what through the learning of Torah, we are then obligating ourselves and appreciating what those responsibilities are. With this, we now can understand. The question is, how do people get, why does the Torah tell us about physical reward, if the Talmud says there's no reward in this physical world? It's because it's not about reward. There is no physical reward in this world. It's not reward. It's support money. It's to be able to do the job. The very fact that God gives us things is that we should be able to do the job. And the reason why we sometimes find that tzaddikim do suffer, righteous people do suffer, and evil people do get better, do seemingly live better lives, and that is because that the reward in the world to come should be on an even playing field. That means sometimes because a tzaddik may have some, so to speak, extras that he's not deserving of, or he's not utilizing, therefore it has to be, so to speak, taken care of, cleaned out through that pain and suffering that they go through. And that's why when we talk about the entire Torah reading of Bechukotai, when we talk about the pain and punishment, and why the Torah goes into such detail about the pain and punishment, is because what the Torah is not telling us curses. The Torah is telling us instructions and saying, these are the principles. These are the ways you live your life to be able to connect the physical and spiritual, because if you don't, then what you're doing is you're creating all these other non-essential purposes, and then and this is what happens. When you have non-essential purpose, you start wasting time. You're not creating anything. You're not doing anything good with you. You're not fulfilling your purpose of why you're here in this world. It's a fascinating story which is told about Avram Burenstein of Sachachev. He was known as the Avnei Nezer, a very great scholar who was well known in the Polish dynasty. When he was a young child, his life was on the hinge, if they want to call it. It was threatened that he wouldn't be able to make it. His father quickly ran to his Rebbe, who was then the Kotzker Rebbe, was known for his wit, didn't always explain what he was saying, what he was doing. And he told him that a child is almost in the other world. He quickly asked the father, he says, what does your child do? He says, what does he do? The kid is a genius, doesn't stop studying Torah all day. He says, what does he do? He says, he just studies Torah. And says, and what does he do in his free time? He says, he also studies Torah. And he goes, probably he's not learning enough. The father walked out. He said, what? What's going on? What did he just say? My child sits and learns all the time. But the Kotzker Rebbe didn't explain himself. He comes home and he sees his child is feeling all better, sitting and studying Torah. What did the Kotzker Rebbe tell him? What was he really telling him? If you say that he's learning, and he's learning the whole time, maybe you think, okay, he did his job, now God can take him. What did the Kotzker Rebbe say? He didn't learn enough. And because he didn't learn enough, he still has to continue learning. And if he has to continue learning, he still has to stay here in this world. He still has a mission to accomplish. So we come back to what we started off before, and now we began, is that Parshas Bechukotai is telling us there's a direct correlation, not indirect, not sometimes has an impact, but a direct correlation between what we do in the physical world and how it impacts in the spiritual world. And therefore, and our question is, how can we live a spiritual life and recognizing and understanding and appreciating that anything that's happening to us, and when we have a certain challenge that's in a physical element, we have to remember it is connected with our spiritual element. And for that reason, many times the Rebbe told people to check their tefillin and their mezuzahs. Say, what does that have to do with me? But I have to get surgery, but what does it have to do with my tefillin and mezuzahs? Because your spiritual Wi-Fi, your spiritual connectivity has a direct impact on your physical body. And therefore, whether it be another mitzvah that we strengthen or whatever it may be, showing God that you have a purpose here, you have a reason to be here, is why you're here. And then all of a sudden, you create that advantage. You're already on a vantage point. Very fascinating story. I think I said the story once before, but it's a great story nonetheless, which really articulates this point. There's a rabbi, his name was Rabbi Nachem Vahava. He's an unbelievable Talmudic scholar, and he is a Rosh Kollel. He leads a Kollel in Jerusalem. When he was about 25 years old, young father, he started having terrible pain in his ear that was getting just worse to worse, and every single day he was losing his hearing, was getting worse. Then he went to a ENT, a doctor, to check what's going on. And they told him, why don't you go get an MRI in Bellinson, which is another very famous hospital in Jerusalem. He goes to get an MRI, and it comes out that they find that he has a massive mass tumor in his head, on his brain. It's not a cancerous tumor, but because it's so big, they said it's not small, it's not big, it's humongous. And because it's so big, it's sitting on the nerves, and as it grows, it's affecting another nerve. And today he says you're not going to be here, tomorrow will be a vision, tomorrow next day will be something else, and there's no way you can operate it, because right where it is, it's touching so many nerves, and it's unbelievable. You can't operate it, you can't do radiology, you can't do anything about it, and you'll just have to suffer with it. He went from one doctor to another doctor. In Israel, there's a guy, his name is Rabbi Fuhr. He has connections with all the doctors, brought him to the best doctor in Hadassah, and the doctor told him, listen here, let me tell you, there's a neurosurgeon. He said, any doctor that tells you that this can work out is lying to you, because there's no hope, there's no way you can get this out. Rabbi Landau from Bnei Brak at the time, he passed away already, of blessed memory, he said that he knows a doctor in California, the top neurosurgeon in the world. Let him go to California and see if they can get the surgery. It was about $150,000 to get the surgery done. So you have to raise the money for him. And he was going to go to California and get it done. He goes to California to get it done. And this doctor tells him, I can do the surgery, but it's not going to be 1 hour. It's not going to be 2 hours. It's going to be a surgery that's going to take a good 6-7 hours, because one of the nerves are actually touching also the nerve that helps the person breathe. And we have to be very careful when we take that out. Baruch Hashem, miraculously, they did the surgery. After many hours, he went for 2 months in rehab, and he lives a happy, healthy life. However, postscript to the story is what's fascinating, what happened right before the surgery. Right before the surgery, he was coming to California from Israel. He made a stop off at JFK, and he went to the Rebbe's Ohel. And while he was by the Rebbe's Ohel, his teacher, his rabbi, this Menachem Bahava's rabbi, Rabbi Yaakov Shwika from Kfar Chabad, calls him up and says, listen here, you're about to go into the Rebbe. You need to give God an excuse, a reason that you should live. And he was a very unbelievable Torah scholar, also knew very good orator, writing, was a prolific writer. And he wrote one book, and he was supposed to write another book that he never got around to it. You have to go into the Rebbe and say, I promise that I'm going to take upon myself to make sure that the next book comes out, whatever it is, because he says, now you wrote a book that was for scholars. You got to write a book that's going to be for every Jew. Like this, God will have a reason to put you back into this world that you should be able to survive. The fascinating thing is, while he's on the phone to this rabbi from Kfar Chabad, the publisher's on the other line. And the publisher was calling him about something else. So he tells him, he says, remember the publisher, he says, remember you asked me to write a book that will be for, general populace? I commit that I'm going to write the book. Anything you need, as soon as I'm better, I'm going to write the book. He went into the surgery. Today, he already put out 2 more books, 3 more books since that story. But what the point of the story is, give God a reason of why you need to be here. If we're not doing anything, if we're not utilizing it, what does God say? What do we need it for? And therefore, if we look, and during the 10 days of repentance, we say, we say in the Avinu Malkeinu, God, do it for you, your purpose, if not for my purpose. What kind of chutzpah? You're standing in front of God and say, God, make me feel better because you're going to do good. What do you mean? 1 second. Hey, God can say, what do I need you for? Have a nice day. What are we saying over here? The Hasidic explanation is the obligation that we're telling God. It says, God, if you want me to be able to accomplish what's in this world, I got to be here. I got to be healthy. We got to have peace. We got to have things working out. We can't do our job if you don't make things work out properly. The same idea as you find, the very famous story, we'll finish with the story of Hannah. Hannah, the prophetess Hannah, when she had her son Shmuel, Rosh Hashanah, we read this Torah reading, and the Haftorah. And Elisha, Elkanah, who was her wife, was her husband, used to take her every single year, and she would complain, I don't have children, Penina had 10 children, and she would have problems. And all of a sudden, it comes that day, she goes into the holy temple, and she starts praying. And what does Eli, the high priest, yell at her and says, what, are you drunk? Why did he call her a drunk? He saw her walking out with a bottle of alcohol, but she had a flask. What did he call her a drunkard for? What's going on over here? And over here, what it was bothering Eli was, Eli sees, and not only that, today we learned the way to pray, Shmon Esrei, from the way Hannah did, quietly. What's going on over here? Eli walks into the holy temple, sees a woman crying for children. What is his first reaction? Why do you want children? Because you want to be a mother? What's a drunk? Why does a person drink alcohol? Because he likes it, because it feels good. Doesn't care about anybody else but himself. Therefore, what does Eli yell at Hannah? What are you drunk? You're praying for something that you only want? Why are you praying only? You're a self-centered person. God decided you don't have children. Tough luck, move on. Maybe it was callous of him. But the bottom line is, he tells him, since when is prayer what you want? What does Hannah turn to Eli and say? You got it all wrong, Eli. I cannot serve God properly if I don't have a child. I want this child to be dedicated to God. And I can't if I don't have a child. I'm not a drunk. I'm here for a purpose, for a godly purpose. This is what we see. This is the way a person's supposed to pray. When we ask God for a healing, when we ask God for peace, when we ask God for salvation, we ask God for prayers, what are we asking for? Remember that with every benefit there comes a responsibility. You want to be healed, you want to feel better, realize that there's a responsibility. You're going to be healed, so what are you going to do about it? How are you going to help it? The Baal Shem Tov says, when it says in the verses in Tehillim, Re'evim gam tzmeim, those that are hungry and those that are thirsty, nafsham behem tisataf, it's their soul that's crying out. The Baal Shem Tov says that when a Jew is hungry and a Jew is thirsty and a Jew needs money, why does a Jew want it? Because when a Jew sows physicality, when we deal with physical, we're bringing up spiritual. A Jew needs money so that they can mitzvahs with it. A Jew needs money so they can give tzedakah. A Jew needs to be healthy so they can serve Hashem. It's not the physical of the Jew that's crying out to God and says, I'm hungry. It's the soul saying, I want to be able to be connected to my Creator, so God has to give me what I need spiritually as well. This is the same idea as also. As we're ready, asking of God to have healing, we're asking God for blessings. We're looking at this week's Torah reading. What the Torah reading is telling us, there's a direct correlation between the physical and the spiritual. We are asking God to bring Moshiach so the world can have its healing of spirituality. So we can bring the spiritual oasis to the world. For God's glory, for God's benefit. We need to do our job. So therefore God has to give us peace, tranquility, happiness, health, nachas, so we can do our job properly. And God will then give everybody, God already gives everybody what they need, and will fulfill the mandate to finally make this world a holy place for Hashem.